This is Keith Helwig. During this video, I'd like to discuss the humanity of officers, whether it's correctional officers or whether it's police officers. During the course of my 40-year career in law enforcement, both in corrections and as a police officer, I've seen more acts of humanity than I can begin to describe. I recall an example at the prison where an inmate was going to jump off the top tier. Myself and two other officers were up on the tier with this individual, trying to talk him off. Eventually, we were able to get him off after he'd cut his throat with a razor blade and threatened to jump. So we had this inmate who was extremely distraught. He was covered with blood. We got him off of the railing, and I'll never forget one of the officers that I had with me, I'm not going to name them because he'd probably be embarrassed, was a big man. This individual was on our emergency response unit. I used him on my cell entry teams. He was an officer's officer, and I'll never forget that he put handcuffs on the inmate, and as we were leading the inmate out of the unit to take him up to health services for a medical exam, I'll never forget this officer just reaching up, patting him on the shoulder, and while he escorted him with one hand on the cuffs, he kept the other hand on his shoulder, reassuring him. This was a definite act of humanity. So I was sitting reading the newspaper this morning. It was a nice quiet day. My wife is gone babysitting our grandchild. And I came across an article in the newspaper which I feel really stresses the humanity of police officers as well. I can't remember it all, so I'm going to read it to you. The headlines are, Officer Describes Faint Whisper Finding Abandoned Infant. Now usually in a situation like this, I don't name the perpetrator or the person that committed the crime. However, I feel this person is such a piece of dirt that his name bears mentioning. His name bears being remembered. I'd like to read the article. It's from Missoula, Montana. A faint whimper in the darkness was all it took. Missoula County Sheriff's Deputy Ross Jessup and U.S. Forest Service law enforcement officer Nick Schultz rushed toward the sound after hours spent searching the woods for a missing infant. Deputy Jessup was about to take another step when he heard a crack underfoot. He looked down to find a cold, wet, soiled 5-month-old baby boy face down under a pile of debris. I abandoned any police training or any chance of saving evidence. I didn't care, Jessup, a father of 3, told reporters. I scooped up the baby and made sure he was breathing. He had a sparkle in his eye. I warmed him up, gave him a couple of kisses, and just held him. The baby had been abandoned for at least 9 hours before Jessup and Schultz found him at 2:30 a.m. He was cold, hungry, scraped, bruised, but otherwise good condition. They wrapped him in their coat and carried him out of the woods. It was the happiest 15 to 20 minutes of my career, Schultz said of the walkout. The baby drank a bottle of Pedialyte in under a minute, then drank 2 more, said County Sheriff Bill Burt. The baby's tiny, dirty hand grasped Bert's finger with surprising strength, then he fell asleep in the hospital. The individual that did this was a man named Francis Crowley. Remember that name, Francis Crowley. This POS had a car accident and was walking out of the woods and decided that the baby was too heavy to carry, so he simply took this 5-month-old baby and placed him face down in the woods, leaving him there to die. It was only through the efforts of deputies such as Ross Jessup and U.S. Forest law enforcement officer Nick Schultz that this baby lived. They showed humanity. They showed humanity in looking for this baby. They showed humanity when they found the baby. They showed the kindness and love that an infant deserves. What the infant doesn't deserve is to ever be returned to Francis Crowley or the unnamed mother of the infant, who obviously didn't give a crap about this infant or would have done something herself. My only hope is that Mr. Crowley spends a long, long time in prison. My other hope is that the 5-month-old baby finds people who care about it as much as Deputy Jessup and Officer Schultz did. These 2 law enforcement officers showed a mark of humanity that few of us will ever experience. Thank you, stay safe, and watch your back.